Hi, this is Susanna Corbett. Thanks for downloading Steptoe Son.
Hello and welcome to Steptoe Son, a podcast based at Mews Cottage, 26A, Aldrum Lane, Shepherd's Bush. This is the home of the world's most famous rag and bone men, or as Harold would say,
salvage recovery operative.
My name's Darren.
And I'm his co-host Si, also known as Two of the Three Comedians podcast that we co-host along with the amazing Tom from One Foot in the Podcast.
We hope you enjoy listening. Please check out the pod on Spotify, Insta, Twitter and all other platforms. Hi, is that Brian?
Evening.
Hi there, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Hey Brian, how are you doing? You okay?
Yep, all good, thank you. You guys all right?
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, thanks for coming on. You can probably work out. I'm Darren, and this is my co-host and oppo Si.
How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Brian. It's just to introduce yourself to our listeners. This is Brian Slade, the author and new friend of Steptoe Son. So welcome to Aldrum Lane, Shepherd's Bush. Mind where you put your feet, the horse. But yeah, so I don't know if you want to. We've got obviously a few topics to talk about, but whether you want to just introduce yourself and just say a bit about how the book on Frank Thornton began.
Yeah, so Frank's my second book. My first book was Simon Cadell from Heidi High.
Yeah,
and which is I hate referring to him as that Simon from Heidi High, but it's his most popular character. So so I got to do Frank as a sort of circumstantial thing where my father was good friends with June Whitfield, and they did a memorial service for her. My dad wasn't able to go, and he really, really wanted to go, so he got me set up as a proxy attendee. And I said to him, look, I don't move with all these people. I'm going to be right fish out of water. And he said, oh, don't worry, we'll look after you. I'll get some of my friends to look after you. And one of those people was Pam Bannister, Trevor Bannister's wife from Are You Being Served?
Wow. Yeah.
And so we went to the memorial, and then some of us went out for dinner in the evening, and I happened to be sat opposite Jane Thornton, Frank's daughter. And we, getting to know each other, and was talking about Simon, and she said, oh, people always used to say to Pa that you should write your story. And Frank was quite a modest person. He would always say, oh, no, nobody's interested in me. I'm just a jobbing actor. But then she said he'd clearly planned or thought about doing stuff, because he was a proper hoarder, and he kept scrapbooks from when he turned professional in 1940.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And he clearly thought about it, but he was that strange mix of sort of confident, this is how acting should be done, this is how the theatre should be run, and then the moment he criticised anybody, he would get all humble and say, oh no, but I'm just a jobbing actor, I shouldn't, don't take any notice of me, sort of thing. And it was that curious combination of things. And so, we thought nothing more of it. And then I wrote a piece on Frank for a television website that I do some writing for. And I thought about it more, and I thought, if he's got all these scrapbooks and letters and everything, it seems a shame, because I think, Frank Are You Being Served was a big character, a big show anyway, worldwide. Obviously, it was a big success in the States and in Europe. And so one good character like Captain Peacock is enough, but then Last of the Summer Wine, he was in so many episodes of that across his last 13 years. And that sort of is on top of him being a very, very successful theatre performer. He performed with John Gielgud, and Donald Walker Company was where he started. So he was a proper thespian before comedy sort of grabbed him and pigeonholed him. So I went back to Jane, and we had a few discussions, and she said, well, come up and have a look through his files and his scrapbooks and everything and see what you think. If there's enough to do it, then we'll see. And we went through it, and, I said to her, look, if you're not comfortable with it, it's fine, but, Frank won't come out of it badly. So eventually we went there. And I think he clearly did think about it, because he left a little note, which was dated late 1980s, some point. And it was addressed to Beryl, his wife, his daughter, and anybody else who might come into its possession. And it was apologizing for some of the things he'd written in his earlier days, and pleading that if anybody should ever publish any of it, that those certain bits would be cut out because it might upset people that he became friends with. And so he clearly had it in his mind at times that he would do that. As it turns out, I couldn't find anything that I had to cut out. It was, typical Frank, really. He thought he'd been insulting and he hadn't. But
So
yeah, it was a similar thing with last year we had on Susanna Corbett on the podcast, and one of the reasons she wrote Back Legs of the Cow, I think, was because obviously Harry Corbett's life was cut sadly short, and she wanted to sort of set the record straight on things, about the rumors about him and Wilfred not getting on, and she was a bit like that. I think she went through so much of his history, but I think it was interesting though with Frank, the fact that he hadn't done it himself, I suppose, because what was he, 92 when he passed away?
Yeah.
But again, I suppose it links into you saying he was humble, so perhaps he just thought it would be a bit.
And he certainly wasn't. He wasn't in it for the fame. He was in it to be an actor because he was good at it. He wasn't particularly bothered about functions and being seen. He was much happier being at home with Beryl doing the gardening than attending any premieres. He did one premiere in 2001. He had a very, very small role, and I've already forgotten what the film was.
Gosford Park.
That's the fella.
Yeah, Gosford Park. Yeah,
and he's in it right at the very start. When the credits
that's right. Yeah.
But the director treated him so well. They got him and Beryl up for the Leicester Square premiere for it, and sent the car. And he was fascinated by such a tiny role, seemingly insignificant, because he just basically got the brolly out and opened the car door, and that was about it. But they treated him like he was a star, and he was fascinated by the way that happened, and he did enjoy that clearly, but more as an unusual sort of view into Hollywood rather than something he would like to have done more of, I think.
I suppose being a star of the BBC and things like that, I guess that's kind of, although IB and Sir was popular across the world, it's sort of, it's still quite a British thing, isn't it? So that international picture, I guess, was something he perhaps, like you say, wasn't used to. So that's fantastic. So so he started off as he was an RAF officer, wasn't he?
He trained in the war. Yeah, he didn't actually see any action, as it were.
Right.
So he became a navigator. So his eyes weren't good enough. For actually piloting. So he did that. So he went off to Canada for his training.
Wow.
So he turned professional in 1940.
Yeah.
And then
do you think that sort of having been in the military gave him that sort of sense of grace? Obviously, in how he's being served, he's quite authoritative, isn't he, and regimented. Did that sort of help him, do you think, or is it just another part that he sort of grew into?
It possibly did. He was, when I said about the letter where he was worried that he'd upset people if some of his comments came around, he was only in his teens when he started with Donald Wolfett.
Right.
And he was sort of very impatient to get to being on the stage. Donald Wolfett was one of the old school, actor, director, it's all about me sort of people. So even if he had very little in a scene, he would be front and center, and the people with more to do would be behind him, sort of thing.
Right,
Frank sort of struggled a little bit with that side of things. But I think he probably learned a great deal about that, because eventually him and Donald Wolfett became great friends all the way through to the end of Wolfett's life.
Nice.
I think he learned a lot in that period, was permanently working. And then when he finally did get his call up, I think he ended up, as you probably know this, about after the war, when he couldn't work for a certain amount of time after he was demobbed. So he was in with Peter Sellers and Tony Hancock in his office. So they basically worked for him, as it were. It was all to do with the old RAF gang shows.
Right. Yeah.
So he learned a lot of discipline, but his whole family was a sort of very Victorian style, sort of level of almost hierarchy in your own family sort of thing, and I think he kept that going.
Definitely, you can see that in I suppose his most famous role was Captain Peacock, like the And I think I've seen an interview of him saying that somebody asked him about the sort of, the pomposity and the sort of air that he had about him. And he said, I suppose a lot of that comes from the fact that he's just tall, and he sort of carries himself in that way. And it's just physically, he looks quite funny. And you put him up against somebody short or, a different shape, and it's just funny straight away without him having to speak. So I suppose that, and like you say about the Victorian sort of style family that he had, you can see where, he got that from.
And he facially, he was very serious. And had a very dignified, authoritative look about him. He twice in the 70s played Eeyore on stage in stage productions of Winnie the Pooh.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And his daughter Anne Frank said he got the best reviews he's ever had, and it was because it was such a perfect part for him to be this sort of rather dour, rather forlorn sort of, we're all doomed sort of character. He loved doing it, and it was sort of Eeyore meets Eeyore sort of thing. Lugubrious, that is the word that keeps coming back with Frank.
Lugubrious,
that sort of slightly hangdog, very serious expression.
So I think in the interview I said, I'm sure he said when he started off, he did obviously straight roles, and he said he just struggled with certain, like, connecting with another actor or actress or sort of intimate roles. I think he said he struggled a bit with that, and I think that's around the same time when he met his wife. She said to him basically that role was awful. She was like, yeah, you didn't play that well. So I think he geared more towards comedy, because he had a bit of an advantage, I suppose.
Yeah, he considered himself, he was quite particular that people get a lot of praise if a comedian or a comedy performer then goes away and does a straight role, and everyone says, oh, weren't you brilliant? They were fantastic. What talent? And he said the real talent is, being a proper actor, but being good at comedy is they're the one that you should be looking out for, because you don't have to be a comedian to understand how to act in a comedy. And I think he was very good at that throughout his entire time. So almost the moment you start playing it for laughs, you're going to struggle to get the laughs. He was very good at knowing what level to pitch his performances at.
I think that's why one of the reasons we love Steptoe is that you've got two brilliant straight actors playing these roles,
and wasn't it?
They're not doing it for just laughs, like Harry H. Corbett, method actor.
Joan Littlewood's school of acting, wasn't it? And British
Theatre Workshop
kind of thing.
So Frank was spot on there.
He was a comedian, wasn't he? And not saying he wasn't funny, but that range. That's why we love Steptoe, because of the drama element of it as well. And so even in Are You Being Served, there's moments of sort of seriousness and things like that he plays so well, and then goes on to doing Summer Wine as well. It's great. It's great.
I think that's what drew us to your book, Brian. The fact that he appeared in Steptoe. I think we worked out it was 6 times in the TV series, and then again in the 1973 film. And no other actor. I mean, when you think they had Leonard Rossiter on there twice, there's 2 different characters. He's the only one really they asked back, to come and do in different roles. So they must have just thought so highly of him, Galton and Simpson.
Because was there a reason for that? Was he like a reliable person to go to? Did his agent push him for those jobs, or?
I mean, at the start of his TV career, he was picking up pretty much any sort of authoritative figure. But, he was of the school that most comedy comes from conflict, and sort of not always a class divide, but always some level of one person being above the other sort of thing. So he was very much involved in those sort of roles. Most of the time, even though he was in comedy, he would be the serious person that you're going to get the laughs of because you're rebelling against him. Obviously, Captain Peacock, that was permanent for him. But at the time he was in, so I had a little look. So when he was in The Economist, the first one, so he really hadn't properly taken off at that point. He just joined up with Michael Bentine. So he had an absolute stinker of a show on the West End that flopped awful. And Bentine also had a show that had done really, really well touring. And then when it went to the West End, it nosedived. But one of the producers had seen Frank in The Golden Touch, it was called. and brought him to Benteen.
Mm.
Benteen went on to do It's a Square World. And I wonder if the perception of Frank would have perhaps changed if more of It's a Square World had survived the tape wipings that all those shows.
Yeah.
Because the few bits I saw when I was at Jane's, he had like a show reel, and there were some sketches in there from It's a Square World, ludicrously funny, as you can imagine with Benteen. And you're thinking you've got Clive Dunn, you've got Dick Emery, you've got John Bluth, and Frank.
Doing it really, yeah.
And you're looking at it and thinking, well, it's kind of Goons meets the Python gang before the Python Riders turned up. And I think possibly Frank would have been seen a little differently, because everything he did in there, I mean, he was dressed up as Benteen always did. There's lots of visual comedy, lots of explosions, props and stage management and stuff. And Frank was never entirely the straight man in that show. I mean, he was getting his hands dirty and looking ridiculous, just like everybody else. So whether that would have changed, I don't know. But at that point, I mean, his role in The Economist, I actually had a look in his scrapbooks, and he says, filmed a very small part for Steptoe Son. The part doesn't match the billing at all.
Okay.
In the Radio Times, it says Steptoe Son starring Wilfred Bramble, Harry H. Corbett, with Frank Thornton. And of course, in it for like 15 seconds. Just
but he's still got a mention.
Bartering about the price of the 4,000 sets of false teeth. And that was it. So he did a pretty good, London market sort of accent. But I think Frank didn't like to take credit for something where credit wasn't due. And I think he saw his name in the Radio Times and thought, really?
Yeah. Well, I think he was one of those as well. Like he was doing, like, you'd watch him and he was doing more than you realise. Like in the Christmas one, I just one of my favourite bits of Steps was when you got Harold walks into the travel agents, and then as he walks in, you've just got this sort of snootiness from Frank Thornton's character, and he goes, "The dustbin's around the back," and it's like it's just
the killer line, isn't it?
It's just a killer line. It's just, and he's Harold obviously aspiring to be something he's not, and it just cuts him down that one line.
There's another great line as well where he says, because he's talking to a lady about where they're going to go, and he says something like, and there's guard dogs as well, and he just throws a look at Harry of like, basically keep your sort out type of thing. But again, it's that just acting with your eyes as well as what you're saying, isn't it? That's very well done. Yeah.
And I think he described it as sort of bad smell acting, and he's sort of he's
not,
he's just pulling a bit of a face, but not over egging it. It's just brilliant.
The smell under the nose, wouldn't it?
That's it, But like I said, the fact that they asked him back 6 times, just shows what they thought.
I did one of the first interviews I did was with Giles Brandreth. So Giles and Frank ended up being neighbours in Barnes. They didn't know each other until Frank's later life. And I talked to Giles about typecasting, because obviously Simon left Heidi High. So 5 series into 9, and there was always that fear that you get stuck in the typecasting. And I asked Giles about it, and he said yes and no. Obviously, he didn't want to be known as Captain Peacock for his entire career, but he said from a typecasting perspective, he was of a type. You knew, and if you saw Frank Thornton's name on the cast, you knew what you were going to get. And he said that kind of typecasting was much more valuable, because you knew it was going to be worth watching. You knew it was going to be, a good polished performance, and you wanted it. Which, like you said about them asking Frank back, I guess they knew he's not going to get the funny lines. He's going to get the sneery looks, the put downs for either of the gentlemen. It's and I guess they saw that, one assumes. So.
Well, he plays 2 foreign characters in 2 of the episodes, which obviously very diverse as well, isn't it? So he's going from, like you say, sort of straight guy, British to straight guy. I think he's French. Then he's French again, isn't he? On the plane.
Yeah.
So he has the
Pilgrim's Progress
on the plane. Pilgrim's Progress. I know, again, that's really, diverse range, isn't it? Not just being able to act like that, a British person, be able to act in a continental style as well. That's
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange when I see him in that episode, episode because he's sort of you know him from lots of other things, and you just don't expect him to come out with a French accent. But he nails it. Does a really good job with it. Yeah.
But then there's a few things like that where you'd be thinking, oh, what's Frank Thornton doing on there?
Yeah, that's it.
I don't know if you ever saw All Rise with Julian Clary.
I'm familiar with it, but I've not watched many of it now.
Yeah, that's a curious one. So that it was almost like a little renaissance time for Frank just before Last of the Summer Wine came along for him, and he was playing the. It wasn't the judge, but it was like the clerk of the court type thing. So he was just announcing that. So the theory of the show was pretty simple: that a member of the audience with a secret or a sort of a guilty pleasure or something would come on the show and essentially be put on a trial where Julian Clary would grill them, and Frank was up on the rostrum acting with with his judicial wigs and everything. Such an absurd program for him to be in. It was it was essentially fake. Julian loved him. He thought he was absolutely the one he wanted to get.
Yeah.
And it was a late night BBC program. Right. It needed to work because obviously Julian Clary had his career had nosedived after his Comedy Awards.
After the Comedy Awards.
Oh, that's the comment, yeah.
So this was the sort of tentative way of getting back in.
Norman Lamont, yeah. Oh, God.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a contrast there with him and Frank.
Yeah, I was going to say you've got sort of young up and coming comedian and young up and coming actor comedian, and you've got a well known actor that they
got on really well. The family's got on really well as well.
Oh, excellent.
He wasn't someone I expected to be able to chat to, Julian, and although Julian's memory wasn't particularly healthy, he was gushing about his respect for Frank.
Great.
Beryl loved him as well. She thought he was brilliant. The only reason he didn't do the second series was because Last of the Summer Wine came along.
I was just going to say, so Summer Wine, so Brian Wilde sort of took an absence, didn't they? And they needed someone. And I guess, knowing him to the BBC, Are You Being Served, was he the automatic choice, or was there other people in the running for that role? Or?
No, he wasn't necessarily an automatic choice, but then he wasn't sort of brought in to be the new third man.
Okay.
The expectation was that he would do one.
Episode. Okay. Right.
Okay.
Because Brian Wilde was kind of in and out, and depending on what your source is.
Yeah.
Some people were saying he was struggling with his health. Then other people said he was starting to make unnecessary demands, and only wanted to work a certain amount of time, and wanted a separate trailer and all that sort of thing. Whichever one you believe.
Yeah.
Don't know. But Frank came in and he went to the BBC and they sort of, I think it was Trevor Bannister who'd sort of recommended him as an
okay.
And he went into the BBC and they were sort of thinking, well, Frank, he's 77 or whatever he was at the time. Is he going to be healthy enough? And the BBC guy couldn't keep up with him.
That's brilliant.
So because he was a pretty healthy guy, so the shows on Last of the Summer Wine. I mean, he was in it 13 years.
I was going to say he came in at a transitional time in a way because a year later Bill Owen sadly passed on, and then it sort of became more of an ensemble piece, didn't it? Obviously he was part of trios, but it wasn't the classic trio anymore.
It drifted out.
But how did he find that? Obviously, I guess did he find it daunting coming in and being amongst Peter Sallis and all these people who've been in for a long time? Or
I mean he'd worked with Peter Sallis before,
right?
Not so much Bill Owen,
right.
But I don't know if you know this story, but the This Is Your Life pounced on Frank within a year or two of him starting Last of the Summer Wine.
Hey, I didn't know that.
And they did it at a Last of the Summer Wine event. So they'd Maurice Bright had organised this event at the studios to celebrate, I think it was the 25th anniversary possibly of Last of the Summer Wine.
Yeah.
And of course Frank had only just appeared. And so Maurice's story was that they'd already turned This Is Your Life down twice. Beryl had fended that off because, of course, it's attention for Frank, and that wasn't what he was about. And eventually, this time, she said, "Yeah, I think he's at the right age now where he'd appreciate it." So they did this event, which was supposed to be a sort of big gala dinner and an auction that Jeffrey Archer was auctioning things and raised a lot of money and everything. all the hoi polloi of British television. It sold incredibly well. And they decided that was where they were going to pounce on Frank. And it made it very difficult for Morris, because after filming, Morris got dragged to one side by Frank, and he said, this event, this anniversary event, he said, I'm new. He said, I don't want any fuss about me whatsoever. It's about the other guys. They're what this is about. So he said, just I'll sit in the background. I don't want any sort of heavy involvement in the anniversary, because I've done nothing really. I've been there a year, I think it was.
Yeah. Wow.
And of course, Morris is having to sit there and say, "Okay, Frank, we'll keep you in the background," knowing full well that he's actually going to be the complete focus of the end of the show, sort of thing. So again, his humility about it was very good. He loved the writing of Galton and Simpson. And then when they came as far as Last of the Summer Wine, he thought Alan Bell, he thought the writing that he'd done for When Bill Owen Passed was as good as Galton and Simpson ever was.
Right, that trilogy they did. It was just my wife doesn't like many comedy things I like, but when I put that on before, she's been in tears. So just finds it really hard to not cry that big, because it is. There's just a scene where they say, "Would you like one more walk through the hills, old son," or something like that, and they've arranged for Stia Compo to be spelt out, haven't they? And it's just magical.
I thought it was very clever as well that obviously the Peter Sallis character in there, Clegg is obviously cut up about his friend. Frank has only been in there a year or so. And I thought it was quite clever that they still managed to get a good few laughs, but it was nearly all Frank that was getting the laughs.
Right,
moaning about the fact that Compo still owed him £2 or whatever it was, hoping that the letter that they found was going to have no mention of the £2. Then which was quite un-Frank-like for all his roles, because normally one feeding everybody else for their comedy line, and I thought that was quite nice writing, really, to keep Clegg real,
keep him somber, I suppose.
But still not completely destroy the mood of the show.
And he affected a brilliant Yorkshire accent as well. I mean, again, he's not from, is he from London, isn't he, or London area, or
London,
So did there any reference to perfecting that, or did he have to work on that? Or
no, I mean, when I was first researching, I went to the BBC archives, and there were a few bits and pieces of auditions, because back in those days he was firing off letters to pretty much every head of department, whatever the BBC had. He was sending letters off, and he did a few auditions, and they all sort of said, well, he might be okay, but he's got really good diction and good accents, so he might be usable in an audio perspective. So his accents were very, very good. As you saw with Steptoe, with his
with the French
argument about war, that was quite good fun.
And he plays the insurance man, doesn't he, in the Steptoe film? I'm trying to think of what his name was, but he accents, I think, really good.
Yes,
excellent.
So it was really great to see him acting into his 80s. But I read something, the last couple of series, they actually couldn't get him on set. Was that something to do with insurance or something like that? So, sorry, on location, so they had to film them on green screen? That must have been a bit...
yes, to a point. Obviously, they had quite a few stand-in people as well.
Okay.
And actually, I mean, I don't think the BBC treated Last of the Summer Wine very well at the end.
No, they didn't. No, it was treated.
Didn't give it a send-off. If they've got to pull the plug, I know Alan Bell was always saying, at the end of their wrap-ups, they never knew whether they were coming back or not. And they kept getting the stay of execution. But as I understood it from what I read, had it gone on for another series, Frank and Peter Sallis wouldn't have been allowed to.
Right.
The insurance companies just wouldn't have touched them.
Yeah, which is pretty sad, isn't it? I think they're just going to stand in a field or whatever. But I guess, for whatever reason, if something does happen to them, that's it, isn't it? It's going to be a massive...
Yeah. But if you look at the later ones, obviously it's more sort of Brian Murphy and Russ Abbott out and about, and it's
that's it. Which I think injected a bit of vitality back into it. And those last couple of series, I think, were probably some of the better ones that they did, really. But it's amazing how many did I've served. How many he did more episodes of that than he did I've served, didn't he? It's
people tend to forget that, but I mean, it's 13 years, and of course, although I've served was 13 years, the BBC were never that comfortable with the show. So they were only filming sort of one series every 2 years. And even that got cancelled. Most people don't realize it, but it got cancelled after 5 series because John Inman jumped ship.
Yeah, didn't he go to Australia? Did he go and film?
No, he just went to Thames, and then
sorry. He did.
His effort there tanked so badly that they turned his tourist contract up and he came back.
Candy Rock.
He did Old Man Out.
Old Man, that's it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
With Peter Butterworth and
Peter Butterworth, that's it, from the Carry-Ons. Yeah.
Yeah. And I watched it, and it was a bit of a stretch. It was a little strange because obviously I think Mr. Humphreys probably had quite a lot of older lady followers. There weren't that many sort of Mr. Humphreys types at that point on TV. And Old Man Out always ended with sort of John Inman sitting there talking directly to the camera with his cardigan on, sort of as though he's talking to his auntie for 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
It's strange.
It's a little bit surreal in that.
We had an author on called David Clayton last year. I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but he did a book on John Inman, which is most recently out. But I was amazed how popular he was in America. I would say it just translated so well.
Yeah, I interviewed a couple of guys who ran an Are You Being Served website, and they did their own podcast, I think.
They did, yeah. It's two American guys. It's great.
I can't remember. One was New York. I can't remember where the other guy was. And they said they'd just never seen anything like Mr. Humphreys. So small town America, and a sort of really camp gay character. Well, you weren't allowed to say that he was. But he said we were seeing that, and we're thinking, wow, there's nowhere else in America that you would see this character, and they really sort of embraced him over there.
I always think of have you seen the Louis Theroux documentary with the neo-Nazis? He's mentioned on there, isn't he? They bring up, "Oh, you've been served," and he's like, "Wow, that's just so bizarre."
But it wasn't just there. I mean, in the book, there's they went to Holland, and they had to. So all of them went, except obviously Arthur Bruff. And they were doing sort of whistle-stop tour, and they had to move them up to a balcony because the crowds were so determined to get their autographs. They ended up having to sign cards and throw them off the balconies because they couldn't control the people downstairs, which was quite bizarre, really. And you're thinking about people like Frank Thornton and just stiff and starchy floor walker, and you think it's just quite bizarre that they were so welcoming of all that.
So Molly Sugden and John Inman were kind of like the stars, I guess, of Are You Being Served in some ways, weren't they? But I kind of think Frank held it together. He was kind of the glue. He was almost the leader of the gang. Particularly in the late years when it became almost like a gang show, didn't it? They would always finish with a musical number. He would be kind of front and center of it, wouldn't he?
Do you think it was the way he played the character, and it sort of made them funnier?
Yeah,
it just bounced off him.
At the start of it, it was supposed to be Trevor Bannister and Molly Sugden as the headliners. So they, if you see the earlier series, the old "You Have Been Watching" at the end, it'll alternate which one of those goes first. It'll be Trevor Bannister or Molly Sugden. And then when John Inman came back from his failed ITV event, the hierarchy changed to accommodate him. So he was now pushed up. Frank and Trevor were then sharing 3 and 4. Sort of dropped down the order a bit. Which, Frank, he was one of those, he noted that. He
Interesting.
And thought that was a bit off because, John had decided to pull the plug. And the BBC weren't prepared to carry on without him. But then
it's like there's other people in the show, isn't there? It's not just about him, is it? So
and Frank thought they could have gone on without him.
No, absolutely. I mean,
whether they could or not,
they carried on without Mr. Granger. They carried on without Mr. Lucas eventually when Trevor Bannister left. And I think those later series do suffer a little bit, don't they? I think if
they get repetitive. I think
they do.
They revisit some of the stories, and some of the stories they used in the film, and some of them they used on the stage show. The whole thing of taking the whole department out for a holiday.
The film's an interesting beast, isn't it? I watched it again recently, and it just doesn't. It would have been much better if it had been set more in the department store. I think putting them on location in Spain or wherever it was. I don't know. It just felt like a carry-on film, didn't it? It just didn't.
It's a bit like. What's your opinion of Are You Being Served Again, and then Grace Favour?
Grace Favour.
I think as soon as you take him out of that sort of setting, it's very hard to get comedy out of. Because I think I rewatched a couple of episodes of I've Been Served Again, and it's still good. I mean, he's still funny, but I find like with Peacock, he's less of an authority.
Yeah.
They're all sort of level. As soon as you level them out, it's just not as funny.
Which is a little bit of a surprise, really, because they managed to give Nicholas Smith's character, Mr. Rumbold, obviously he just assumed the mantle of running the company. And so his character got the sort of rebellion and the who does he think he is sort of attitude from the others. But of course it left Captain Peacock a little bit in limbo. Because as you say, nobody was minions below him. So it was just left to his sort of rather desperate pursuit of Miss Lovelace or whatever her name was.
Yes. I saw an interview with him once, and he said about Captain Peacock. He said he had no business calling himself a captain. So obviously, no.
There was one episode, wasn't there? After Bruff left, Mr. Granger left, and they were doing interviews.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it was Alfie's character.
Yeah,
called him out and said, "I know you."
Yeah.
And, eventually, sort of, he got the job because he was going to blow the cover on.
Basically, blackmail. Yeah, kind of almost like blackmail into it. Really.
Essentially, he was just in the catering corps in the kitchen.
Seemed funny.
I mean, he had very, very casual morals, Captain Peacock, didn't he? You'd be pulling up Mr. Lucas and Mr. Spooner later on for their tardiness, but then anyone under the age of 40, attractive women, he would be on like a shot, wouldn't he? And it was quite I mean, what did Frank comment on that at all? Do you think obviously that was part of the humour, or did it overstep the mark a bit, or was he uncomfortable with that?
No, he was fairly comfortable. I mean, he wasn't he wasn't so snooty about his comedy.
Okay.
Beryl was a little bit more straight-laced. His wife was a bit more straight-laced, but no, Frank didn't mind at all the sort of slightly bawdier element of comedy. He was a collector of limericks, and he gave his limerick collection to Giles Brandreth when he died. Left that to him, and his daughter said to me, she said, "I don't think any of them would be publishable. Please don't put any in." So all I ended up doing was quoting the one that he uses in Are You Being Served Again?
He uses one, doesn't he? Yeah.
You don't expect it, do you? I think that's what it's just funnier, because you don't expect it from someone like him.
No, especially the delivery would have been totally deadpan for the most absurd limericks there were. I mean, I mentioned before in my email about the Kenny Everett show.
I was going to say you picked that as one of your favourite moments. Yeah,
and again, Kenny was irreverent as it was, and I don't know if you've seen the sketch where, well, it's not just one sketch; it's a whole episode.
We struggled to find it, didn't we?
No, we did have a look after you emailed. We had a look, but I couldn't locate it.
Yeah, so Kenny, as was the mood of the BBC at the time, Kenny was supposed to have succumbed to the bosses at the BBC for being inappropriate. So he's in a court, so there's no one to do his show while he's in the court. So Frank picks it up. I can't remember exactly how that comes to, but he's in several sketches as the characters that Kenny Everett would be. So he comes out dressed as Gizzard Puke. So he's got the green punk and the studs in it, but he's got this piece of paper in his hand for the script.
Yeah.
And comes out in full Captain Peacock mode saying, "Good evening, my name is Gizzard. It says pick nose here. Should I really pick my nose?"
Oh, we'll have to find that.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
It gets to the end of it, and it culminates with Kenny and Frank being in the courtroom as they're about to pass judgment on whether Kenny should be disposed of or not. And Frank throws a temper tantrum and says, "I've never read such filth," and blah, 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 blah. And he's all dressed up in his proper suit and bowler hat, turns around and walks off. And of course, his back half is just a garter and suspenders.
Oh, wow.
Fair play to Frank.
That's fantastic.
It's like the old angry character that Kenny used to do. He was dressed like that. when he turned around. Not afraid to send himself up at all. Yeah.
Oh wow!
So is that because one of the other moments you picked, Brian, was the Tommy Cooper? So he appeared on a.
Yeah, that was he was actually on there twice, and allegedly, Jane, his daughter, said he was on 2 sketches there, and the funniest one was the one they cut out. And Frank mentions in his diaries, he said he was in Tommy was Tommy, and he just kept going on and on and on. So they had to lose 15 minutes of material.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this one sketch got cut. So the sketch that survives is Tommy coming onto a train, and there's a guy with one of the broadsheet newspapers, and he puts the paper down, and it appears to be Hitler. And Tommy's like, got his mystified face as he always has on. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he starts giving Frank a bit of a hard time. And of course, Frank is just some snooty actor who's getting into character for playing Hitler. And the misunderstanding goes on, and Frank gets more and more agitated with Tommy Cooper. So eventually storms off the train, and Tommy moves on to the next one, and he sits himself down in front of this other guy, and of course says, "Oh, some of these people," he said, a bit touchy, aren't they? And this guy pulls the newspaper down, and it's Hitler. It's a good sketch because, of course, Frank's totally over the top playing this snooty actor, but also pretty good at being Hitler at the same time.
Oh God, yeah, you can imagine.
But then Frank worked with absolutely everybody. I mean, Dick, Benny Hill show, he was on loads. He did loads of work with Terry Scott.
We were saying he popped up in Noel's house party, didn't he?
We were talking about it. Yeah, bizarre.
Which is a great link to the sort of the kind of current times, I guess. Well, not current times, but at the time in the 90s. Yeah, sort of keep himself in the public domain. That's brilliant.
And Noel, I obviously Noel Edmonds had retired from the business, as it were, when I was reading the book, and I noticed his name was still on the agent's book that website that he had. So I got in touch with the agent and I said, look, I know Noel doesn't do anything as such now, but just wondered if he'd be interested in hearing his thoughts from House Party. It only took him about 24 hours to send me this long, lovely email.
Oh, wow.
Saying how much he absolutely loved Frank being on there.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So good. Yeah. And said some of the people that went on there were so terrified of live audiences.
Yeah.
Whereas Frank, absolutely, word for word, perfect every time. And he just thought it was fantastic. And he said, oh, thanks for letting me remember such a brilliant time.
Oh, man, that's brilliant.
That was really nice of him. Good. But I don't know if you remember, they did the old gotcha and got Noel Edmonds and made him sing in at the end of a show. Don't Bring Me Flowers. And they said they were staying on air until he's finished the song.
Yeah.
And there is video somewhere on YouTube of what happened after they finished. And it turns out that Frank was supposed to be at the door, the old door. And of course, they'd rehearsed it, and Frank was supposed to be there and ring the door. And of course, he didn't. And of course, after they've gone off air, Noel was like pointing at Frank. He said, "You were supposed to be at the door."
Right, okay.
And he said,
Because
we were talking about you haven't got one of these yet,
Yeah, we were talking about the gotchas the other night when we saw.
We were on about the Mike Reed one.
Mike, and
then the way they got him. But
some brilliant. I mean, it's good to hear positive stories all about Noel Edmonds because you tend to hear negative in the press, but But I mean, we were saying how influential he was on television, and especially in the 90s, like Noel's House Party was massive.
Yeah, I tend to think nothing's really changed that when you watch Ant and Dec, and I've got no issues with those guys, but their Saturday night takeaway program, it's not really anything different to Noel Edmonds. It's a very well held together live show with two likable guys, but they're playing practical jokes on celebrities and
hidden camera.
And you think, isn't that what Noel did?
It's nothing new, no. He's
he kind of set the template, didn't he? Because it wasn't a game show as such, was it? It was more just a sort of, family entertainment show. Yeah.
Back then, he used to get slated for it, and now win awards for it.
Of course, it was interactive. You had live audience. You had the hidden cameras in the house.
Yeah.
So just getting the general public involved, just made it. It was like, I remember watching it when I was younger. I remember thinking, "Wow, this is brilliant." And now they're doing the same thing now, and it's just. But no,
that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
But
So there's a couple of times that going back to when you served, he plays the piano. Was he an accomplished pianist, or was that just sort of done?
He did play the piano. He played a number of instruments.
Wow.
He was, and there's a couple of episodes as well where he was dancing. One fantastic episode where he does a ballroom dance routine with Mr. Humphreys, and they're spinning each other around on the set. It's fantastic.
Shall I lead? No, I'll lead.
Yes. And then, of course, he did the Germans episode where they're all in the labor, and then he starts having a slapping contest with Mrs. Slocum off the trolley from having
the wine.
You were saying you were just watching that, Daz, weren't you?
I was watching that. The slaps, you could see that they're not acting that is real. But I think what I love about that is where you could see a couple of them, like, not corpsing, but you can see they're genuinely laughing, and you think they must have rehearsed this so many times and it's still funny. I think it was there's a bit with Trevor Bannister. I'm sure they cut away quickly because he's about to crack up.
It always seemed to me that Trevor was the one that was going to most likely break.
Go.
But I mean, Trevor and Frank became fantastic friends.
I was just going to say that's great to hear they were friends, because obviously on screen there was that animosity, and obviously it's not real. But the fact they were real life friends is really heartwarming. I mean, he passed away far too early, Trevor Bannister, didn't he?
Yeah. I met him once. He was in The Old Couple on the West End. He played one of the sort of the poker players in there. Lovely guy, really, really nice guy.
Yeah, he strikes me as being fantastic. He used a lot of pantomime dames, didn't he, as well? I think he used to do quite a lot of that.
He was in panto every year for that.
Yeah. Wow.
A really nice bloke. His wife was lovely. And he used to really look up to Frank for deciding if he thought wasn't sure whether a part was right for him, and he would say to Pam, I'll give Frank a ring, see what he thinks.
Oh, wow, that's great.
He would always trust his opinion as much as anybody.
Did he actually officially retire, Frank, or did he keep just not getting any more work? Or no?
I mean, the parts did dry up.
Yeah.
But no, he didn't retire. I think the very last thing he did, there was one rather awful film, a Ray Cooney film, where loads and loads of people had technically a cameo because they were sat on a bus. Right. And Frank was one of them. And he did wasn't a celebrity master chef, but it was celebrity tasters.
Oh, okay.
The chef, so it was genuine contestants.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I've got a feeling that aired after he died.
Right.
But so he was still in work, because he largely, by and large, he was a healthy man. He had a long history of problems with his nose. Kept going in for operations on that, and he took a bang off his car while they were doing Are You Being Served Again?
All right.
So Frank being Frank, he sent a letter of apology to everybody else in the cast for what he called his slovenly performance in Are You Being Served Again? And it was because he'd had this bang and thought nothing of it, and he actually had to go in for an operation.
Wow.
And you'll see because obviously in later life his a bit like mine, his hairline was not it was not doing him any favors, and you'll see they used to call it his devil horns, because you dents in his head.
Okay.
And that's from the operation that he needed between the two series.
Oh wow.
And there's a lovely letter back from Nicholas Smith telling him off for apologizing for it. He said, honestly, Frank was such a good actor that he said nothing to apologize for. Nobody noticed anything going wrong. But Frank wasn't like that, So. Going back to what you said, I think you were saying about song and dance, weren't you? He his biggest stage success was Me and My Girl.
Oh, brilliant!
In the mid-'80s. So that was just as Are You Being Served? I think they'd finished the final series, but it was just going to sit on the shelf until the BBC could be bothered to air it.
Right.
It's something like 628, I think it was, performances in a row.
Wow, that's brilliant.
And you can find the soundtrack to the original West End production, and Frank's on there doing it.
Oh, excellent.
He's really, really good. It's a lovely song. If only you would care for me the way that I cared for you. It's a duet.
Well, I'll listen to that. Yeah,
Let's have a listen. Yeah,
It's worth looking out. Yeah.
yeah. I have to have a. I think we spent a bit of time on YouTube, so I have to have a look.
yeah.
But yeah.
So how's the book done? Are you pleased with its sort of progress? And
It's I mean at the moment it's only available direct through the publisher at the moment. So they tried to.
Is that Phantom Publishing?
Yeah.
Phantom,
So
yeah.
They tend to only do sort of showbiz, for want of a better term, books. But I was quite happy how it turned out, and the family were happy. So that's the most important thing. Don't write the books for money, really, because nobody makes money unless you're J.K. Rowling. So,
yeah.
How long did it take you? Did it take you a couple of years to sort of get it all together, or
from sort of conception to having the book in your hand? Yeah, a couple of years, but. Frank left so much; it was crazy. It was boxes and boxes, and I'm sure Jane sort of has found stuff since.
Yeah,
that's what I love about that. The fact that he sort of had such a long career, and there's so many comedy actors or actors that turned to comedy that tragically died in their 50s. It's wonderful that he didn't, and he carried on to his 90s. Like you said, he didn't retire. That's what I love.
Yeah, it was a very different thing with Simon. Simon died in his 40s. So it was a very different challenge to do Frank, because when Simon died, obviously a lot of people that he worked with were still around to interview because he died so young. But Simon was he was dyslexic, so you didn't really find anything of his own to no letters or diaries or anything like that. So you were largely reliant on other people, whereas Frank was the opposite. He'd started his scrapbook on day one, April 1st, 1940.
Wow.
Is Simon any relation to Richard Cadell?
Oh, is that the sooty man?
Yeah, he owns a sooty.
No,
he's not. Is he? No, I always wonder because there's a similarity. I met Richard Cadell a few years ago, and I just always thought
actually. Yeah,
there's a bit of a similarity.
Yeah,
unless there's a distant one that the family didn't mention. But Simon had two boys, and neither of them have come into the business. One of them auditioned for Harry Potter.
Oh wow!
One of the roles, because they were only young when Simon died. I think they were about six.
That must be heartbreaking. Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was the different challenge with Simon, because you got the responsibility of somebody's dad. It's a bit different.
Well, when we were talking to David Clayton, he did Wilfred Rambles, and obviously Wilfred Ramble kind of lived alone essentially. He had a partner, but really basically was like he said it was like a detective case. He was having to piece together bits of evidence of his stories people could remember, but it was 30, 40 years he passed away, and he didn't keep many records, did he? So it was a much harder challenge than someone obviously kept the scrapbooks and everything. But was it hard to siphon through and pick out what to include, or did you have to just sort of go on?
Yeah, you don't particularly want to just say he was in this and then he was in that sort of routine. And sometimes the stuff he would recount wasn't necessarily relevant to anything, if you see what I mean. He would moan about something in the setup or say how good something went, but it didn't really add anything to the story. He sort of stopped doing it in the late 80s. Drifted out of it, but in a way that didn't bother me, because obviously the stuff from the 40s and 50s and when he was in the RAF and all that sort of thing, that was a lot more productive, because it's stuff I wouldn't know. And then as I got to know Jane a bit better, she sort of started to let me see other stuff. So I saw letters back to Beryl during the war, and that was quite nice, seeing all these heartfelt letters. And he did the old thing of writing all around the edges to cram as much as he could, envelopes and everything like that. Clearly, he got 2 weeks leave and he went down to New York and just flooded himself with Broadway shows, because that was the world he wanted to live in.
That's incredible.
But siphoning out which bits to use and which not, little tricky. And he wrote more about some things than others. It seemed to be, whether he got particularly passionate about something. So when I was saying about the Holland tour, he didn't like the magazine person that followed them around, and he went to the trouble of translating the article afterwards because he thought it was a bit of, he didn't trust them basically.
Right. Yeah.
So they went over there. They did the tours. They were, shop opening ceremonies and everything, and he got the article translated, and it was quite bad about Wendy Richard. Going to her more than anybody. But Frank was determined that he would find out what they were doing. He wasn't happy at all.
He's looking out for his fellow actors, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he, didn't like they sort of depicted Wendy Richard as a bit of a sort of prima donna that was demanding everything of everybody, which wasn't the case. Trevor was being portrayed as, just about to pick up my wine and say Trevor was a alky, which he wasn't.
No.
Yeah, I suppose anything to sort of sell magazines, newspapers, isn't it? Sort of, add a bit more to it just to get that circulation, I guess. But
there were other bits that were useful. He was in a film, a flea and area, I think it was, with Rex Harrison. And he was fascinated by Rex Harrison.
Okay,
probably the biggest star he'd worked with at that point, certainly from a film industry perspective. And he found it quite bizarre how people would fly around Harrison all the time, kowtowing to him, and the star treatment, because Rex Harrison demanded the star treatment, sort of thing. And he was quite fascinated by all that.
Yeah.
And then there was a later time where he was in Australia, and seemingly to talk about a show he was going to do that was basically Frank, and nothing came of it. And he sort of harked back to the Rex Harrison thing, and he said, we went into this room with a load of executives from Australian TV, and whatever it was they were supposed to have discussed, they didn't. It was just a load of suits discussing budgets and advertising and all this sort of thing. And he was completely out of place there. And he said, if I'd been more of a Harrison and thrown a bit of a tantrum, I might have got something out of it. But it's just not who he was. He didn't want to play that sort of I'm the star, bow before me sort of attitude. So nothing came of that, unfortunately.
Gosh, wow.
And of course, they tried to do I Being Served in America as well. And they actually tapped him up for it. And the only reason he didn't do it was green card regulations.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think he was the one character that they wanted to keep.
Right.
And the one actor, rather.
It's interesting because when it went to Australia, John Inman actually went out there, didn't he? He was in it.
Yeah.
He didn't recast
it was a little strange with Australia because Frank did a fair amount of work down there. But they had strange regulations, so they could have one, and that was all.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right.
And he said it was absurd because he would go down there, and they would then go off to New Zealand to do some work because they would only allow one non-Australian to be involved. So he said it actually cost the Australians work because, because they had more than just Frank. They would actually take it all off, go to New Zealand where they didn't have those restrictions. And all the New Zealanders would get the work plus the portion of Brits that Frank was there with. So, the Australians got absolutely no work out of it. As opposed to just, going with the flow sort of thing. So and he said, they were constantly bringing people over. So Molly went there as well at certain times. John went there.
Yeah.
And they sort of, I can't remember what show he was doing over there, but it wasn't a bawdy English comedy type thing.
Right.
But all the publicity was done with exactly those sort of seaside postcard adverts for the show. Total nonsense compared to what was in it. But that was how it was selling, the bawdy Brit and starring the sitcom man sort of thing.
Yeah.
They must have loved Australia. It's a similar thing with Steptoe. They did the Australian tour, they did the New Zealand tour, and then obviously before Harry passed away, they planned to do another Australian tour the following year. So they must have just loved British comedy at that time. And
because they did two. Ronnies did a series down there, didn't they?
Alf Garnett went out there, didn't he? And
Warren Mitchell was huge.
Something else. Interesting stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. It was a bit of a shame for Frank because he said how much money he would have made from one series of An American Eye Being Served compared to the pittance that BBC gave them for
gets all the syndication across all the networks in America.
Mhm.
I mean, I went to America about 15 years ago. Last time I went, but it was still on. 2010, it was on. I don't know, one of the smaller cable channels, but it was prime time, 9 o'clock. The 2 episodes back to back, and it's like you say, it's huge, isn't it?
They're mad for Benny Hill as well in America, weren't they? And I remember that was on. I think it was showing in theaters at one time. This is probably the late 90s, and just repeatedly showing Benny Hill shows. I remember thinking, well, it's not that popular in Britain. It's just,
Frank used to go over for. There's some interviews somewhere. Because it was always on PBS. So they would all go over there at various times. It was like PBS fundraisers.
That's it.
To discuss their characters and their success. So.
Wow.
What have I forgotten to ask, Si?
I was just trying to think. I think we've had quite a comprehensive thing, haven't we? Really, quite a comprehensive chat about everything. It was
interesting. I was watching the Steptoes to see how Frank sort of developed as it because obviously he was in the first. I think he had one role in the first 3 or 4 series.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a bit of a gap.
Yeah,
and it was interesting. The first one, such a minor role, and Frank wasn't anything.
Yeah,
and then
built up.
Yeah, I think by the 64, the one you mentioned, Pilgrim's Progress. By then he'd been in It's a Square World, been hugely successful. He was on the West End, and it's quite interesting to see what he's playing in Steptoe and the sort of impact he's having. But that was the other one.
Sorry, I was going to say it's about 8 years, wasn't it? I think 73 Christmas special he came back for. It's a good chunk of time to.
Yeah, and it's interesting in his diaries. So they've done Are You Being Served? And then they do. They started recording Are You Being Served, but it's not out yet at that point. So they did the pilot. Eventually, that came out, and then they'd recorded the show, the first series, and then I think Steptoe hit before Are You Being Served properly. Came out. So the sort of travel agent one, he's not become Captain Peacock at that point.
Right.
They're just waiting for Are You Being Served to be aired, and of course get absolutely panned. And
does Frank mention Harry or Wilf at all at any point in, say, any of his notes? Or
Harry Corbett? No. Wilfred Bramble, he did. And that was when he was talking about how they dealt with Compo dying in Last of Some Wine, rather.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how well that was written. And he said that he'd done some fan mail. I think I've got it here. He'd answered some fan mail, and he was talking about Wilfred Bramble. And he said they were discussing Albert having a heart attack. I think it was obviously he was constantly blackmailing.
Yeah. He had about 15, didn't he?
Yeah.
Gold. I'm going.
And he said Wilfred Bramble recorded an episode where he was, as you say, threatened to leave home, fake a heart attack, and then, of course, make a brilliant recovery once he's decided to stay. And he said, apparently, and this is Frank's words, he said, Wilfred Bramble said to Galton and Simpson, Albert's going to have a real heart attack because my mother always had something similar whenever I displeased her. Threatened departure, recovering from the crisis when it had passed. Sort of thing. It was real. It wasn't feigned. That's what he said. Wilfred Bramble's mother, that is. Galton and Simpson, he said, were rather disturbed by this, saying this is sitcom, not drama. You can't do that. And I said, you don't know how good you are. The depth of your writing will take it, and I'm going to do it. And he said, the proof came. Frank said there was no recording machine, so they had to watch Steptoe before they went out, and him and his friends were absolutely riveted by what Wilfred Bramble did. And he said this was sitcom. One of the principles was like seemingly near to death, unprecedented. And he said, real comedy is fixed in sort of reality. And he said Wilfred Bramble was so good at doing that particular scene. And obviously a big fan of his.
That's brilliant.
We've mentioned this before about how Wilf would go from like this sneering, having a go at Harold, and then literally, if Harold was going to leave or he was going to get married, he'd go back to the innocent, wide-eyed sort of, oh, gold me heart or me back, You know,
Yeah.
so he was just brilliant. It's just a flick of a switch, and he'd go from one thing to the other.
And like you're saying about the sort of serious element to it, one of the episodes that Frank was in when it was Albert's birthday.
Oh yeah, he was a barman, wasn't he?
Forgot him, and then, of
65
course,
today,
yeah, and they
I
end
love
up
that one.
going to the very expensive bar, and Frank is the barman.
That's it.
You know, sort of, and Albert sitting there complaining about, oh, you know, $7.50 for this.
Yeah,
I
I want a pint of bitter. It's like, you don't do bitter. Because I want to drink with guts in it.
He's just a grizzle guts for the whole episode, and then it gets really, doesn't it? When Harold had enough and just leaves him, and he loses his gloves and everything.
Oh, that's like you say about the sad. You know, you see his gloves at the end. It's like they just can't end with on a funny note. They have to have that, you know, tragic.
Yeah. And I found that one interesting because when he was in the restaurant, in the Chinese restaurant, and he was bothering the customer on the other table, saying, "I don't look 65, do I?" and all this sort of stuff.
No, it's brilliant.
That was Richard Caldecott on the other table, and Frank and Richard Caldecott starred at the same time. They were in HMS Paradise, which was his first crack at sitcom, and they did 26 episodes, none of which have survived anywhere, and they got absolutely slated. It was such a shame because it's one of those where you wonder if it had survived, would we look at it with such sort of criticism? But
timing is everything, isn't it? The timing it comes out, and
it was a bit odd because they did 13 episodes and they were so happy with the way they were going. They automatically carried on with the next 13 before they'd even aired any of them. They were that convinced it was a hit. But
I suppose it must be hard to get over something like that, because if you think this is going to be a great success, put a lot into it, and then it's just a flop.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess in some ways, if it bombed that badly, it's not necessarily a bad thing that it just vanished.
It's not out there.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously didn't destroy either of their careers, but it was quite sad reading it because Frank's got loads and loads of reviews and how much they enjoyed. The very last episode they actually filmed on a ship, and the Navy were really good with them, and it all seemed, you know, it seemed very good. They seemed to enjoy it. They're good writers, but for some reason the public just couldn't take it. It was somewhere between like trying to bring the Navy Lark into a television sitcom format. And whether that was an element of it, people wanted the Navy Lark, not this. But and then Frank ended up doing the Embassy Lark on radio.
All right, okay,
and that was very successful. That went on for a long time. So yeah, quite why HMS Paradise got panned. Hard to tell. Never know, will we?
Never know. No, I said
there's another show called Hugh and I. I think he was in an episode of that, wasn't he? Just having a quick look, and that's similar. That there's not many of those that survive. The ones that do are brilliant. It's Terry Scott and Hugh Lloyd, isn't it? And it was directed by David Croft, who did Dad's Army later on. Molly Sugden was the next door neighbour in it, I think. And again, it's like. It's like you say, it's that sort of, we'll never quite see the whole body of that work, sadly.
But that's Hugh and I think is part of that whole David Croft rep company. David Croft was supposedly very good at thinking, right, I'm going to use them again one day. That was where Frank and Molly first came across him, and of course he came back for both of them.
I mean, I guess he couldn't really use him in Dad's Army once he put him in I'm Being Served. It was kind of too big, isn't he?
He did a radio.
Oh, did he?
Wow. He did record a radio for Dad's Army.
Oh, brilliant.
I was going to say, I'm sure I remember. I was going to say I remember him in Dad's Army, but I listened to the radio shows recently, and that's probably where it's just stuck in my mind.
I mean, I'm not sure. He certainly mentions in the diaries that he recorded a radio show. Whether it made it or not, I don't know.
Oh no, brilliant.
I think it is out there, I think.
Good stuff.
But and he worked with Terry Scott. Terry Scott did a Scott On, which constantly with June Whitfield and Peter Butterworth and Frank. There's a picture in the book of Frank with Terry and Peter all in drag, clutching their legs. Again, Frank quite happy to send himself up as the
Yeah.
person.
Did you say you knew June Whitfield? Because there's a Steptoe link there as well. She was in that.
Yeah, and of course they were in Hancock as well together, weren't they? The Blood Dog.
Okay. Yeah, and Summer Wine, obviously, she was in Summer Wine towards the end, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was lovely. Met you.
Yeah, she struck me as just a fantastic actress and just a lovely person all around. And she was still doing stuff into her late 80s, wasn't she? And she was in a Jonathan Creek. She did one of those.
Oh yeah, Jonathan Creek. Yeah,
like twins in that, didn't she? Like sort of
yeah.
Which again, it's just fantastic, isn't it? That sort of link across the eras of comedy and comedy drama.
My dad went to the theatre with her once because it came about because he used to manage a hotel in Wimbledon, and June lived around the corner.
Oh wow!
So they would go to theatre sometimes, and they went to some production that was a bit of a disaster because nobody was in the theatre. They went up to the balcony for the second half, and June just kicks off her shoes and puts her feet up on the table on the row of seats in front of her. And said to me, "Dad, I've been dying to do that." A lady of her standing could not. But she sneaked a little drink in there and had a feet on the chair in front of her.
Relax.
So it just shows people are human in there, isn't it? Really, these big actors, big names. It's actually the same as everyone else, really. Yeah.
He also had to drag her away from a function once because she'd put a particular kind of makeup on, and it was a bit sort of Cinderella at midnight sort of thing. She said because it suddenly decided to melt.
Oh gosh!
Into the evening, and so she was sort of, Ray, we've got to go. Why? And sort of shows the face.
No, she's brilliant in Steptoe, wasn't she? She's just the
yeah.
So an episode of Last of Summer Wine with her and Warren Mitchell. I don't know if you know that, where Warren was seemingly preparing for an Icelandic trip to the North Pole. He was dressed in like white parka jacket and everything, and it turns out it was just an elaborate ruse to get away from his wife, June Whitfield.
Yeah, because she was in that and she came back as a different character, didn't she? Yeah, so she sort of
on that occasion it was just a one-off, and then she came back as a recurrent.
Yeah, that's right. And Russ Abbott's character thinks it's his mum later on, which is great comedy out of that. Yeah,
there's another thing you should look up if you can find it. It was a bit tougher to find. Was Kelly Monteith?
Yeah, I was going to mention about that.
Yeah.
Kelly Monteith. So Frank appeared as a bank manager.
Yeah, he appears quite a few times in the Kelly Monteith show. I remember watching Kelly Monteith. He sort of was guest on Des O'Connor a few times in the early 80s. Hysterically funny. And the Kelly Monteith show was kind of it sort of broke the fourth wall big time. So it was like a sitcom about the comedian Kelly Monteith. But, the scene would happen, other people would go away, and then he'd start talking to the camera and do a little bit of sort of stand-up comedy. And this particular episode was, I can't remember whether it was he was trying to get funding for something or something. And this other character said, "Oh yeah, we'll meet so-and-so from the bank." They meet up in a posh restaurant, and the bank man is Frank. And I thought, this would be interesting to see, another stiff and starchy character to rebel against. And he was so much more than that. And if you remember the Humphrey pieces in Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, where he would rattle off the most absurd speeches, and Hacker was just looking completely baffled, didn't understand a word he was saying. And it's one of those. Frank does one of those, and he's word perfect. And I thought, wow.
Yeah.
I did not expect it from him. It's all the laughs were his in that one sketch, and the others are just looking at him thinking, what the hell's going on here? What's he saying? But he was so good in it. And he was quite good with younger comedians. He was quite happy to give anything a try in that respect.
Fantastic.
That's good. Well, I could talk all night, Brian. Thanks.
Have you got any other sort of actors in the pipeline that you wanted to cover and produce books about? Or
There's one I'm working on at the moment, which I can't actually say.
Sorry, something you thought actually. You maybe want to say actually. Yes, obviously don't
Yeah.
say if you don't want to say.
Completely,
You should
completely.
just whisper it, Brian.
I'm completely at
Great
the
stuff.
family have just said yes stage.
Oh, brilliant!
So
Nice.
I've got got some research to do before it goes any further.
I suppose it's tricky as well finding someone that someone hasn't written about because obviously you kind of don't want to saturate the market too much. And I know David Clayton said that he found that someone had done a book about John Inman at the same time he'd done one. And yeah, because it's anyone can write a book, can't they? I guess.
And it gets trickier as time passes because obviously not everybody does like Frank did, and the more modern they are, the less there is because obviously everything goes digital. So you wonder how people will do authorized biographies eventually because there just won't be anything to look through. I mean, it was just fascinating looking through Frank's letters. And,
that's great.
There's so much of it. And all that's going to be gone. But of course, if you're relying on older folks like Frank, the number of people you can talk to about them is dwindling. So we're sort of diverging, as it were.
That's what David Clayton said about he met some of Wilf Bramble's family, but he was tracking them down somewhere in Ireland. And I think he put an advert in a paper and he managed to get a couple of phone calls and he did interviews and stuff, but just tracking people down from years ago is almost impossible, isn't it? And trying to get them to open up to you.
Yeah, you're kind of relying on sons and daughters of people at that stage. Which is going to be one of my challenges with my next subject.
Keep in touch, Brian. You have to let us know.
Best of luck with it. Yeah, fantastic.
You have to come back on, then we'll chat about it.
Yeah, I don't think he was ever in Steptoe.
I'm sure there's a link. It
was the right era for Steptoe.
Right era. Okay.
Right. Okay. So I encourage all of our listeners go out and buy To Be Frank.
Thank you.
By Brian Slade. What have I forgotten, Si? There's always something I haven't mentioned.
No, that's been spot on. Thank you so much for giving up your time to talk to us. And like I say, it's great to we do Steptoe, but we do more, don't we? Our other pod is with a guy called Tom who did a One Foot in the Grave podcast. So anything in that era of 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s comedy, we love it, don't we? We just dive into it, and we focused on Steptoe because we thought, well, no one's done a Steptoe pod. But it's great to chat to people like yourself who've written about actors who've spanned comedy. You've done lots of different roles in comedy, and it's just fantastic. So thank you.
I think when you've got the Bats TV seem to have grabbed a huge chunk of the lesser lights.
They do, and great. It's great to see them back on the screens, isn't it? Some of these shows that just the BBC don't want to touch again, or
Likely Lads and things like that. And
even UK Gold, they have their favourites. Only Fools and Horses is, we love it to bits, but it's repeated to death. There are other comedies out there.
I mean, it's good. Introducing it to a younger audience as well. Because with Are You Being Served, I can remember that being on mid-90s on I think it was UK Gold, and that's how I got into it. I remember watching it back to back, thinking this is incredible. It does. It brings on a younger audience, gives them a chance to see it. It's a lot easier to now, I suppose, with the internet. But
I've got a picture up in my office at work because I work at local university as well, and I've got a picture of Frank from the Christmas episode. Where I don't know if you remember this, where it was a really tacky canteen lunch.
The dinner.
And they pull all the crackers, and Mr. Granger's got giant ears, and Frank gets the glasses with the googly eyes.
The glasses. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and he absolutely sells those glasses brilliantly. He's sort of really exaggerating his head moves to make them work. And I've got a picture of that at work with just the words, a little decorum, please. which is Captain Peacock's line in that scene. And I thought, I'll
hopefully it works.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
Oh god, that's brilliant. But no, thanks again, Brian. You'll as I said, love to have you back on again, talk about your next venture.
Yeah, so as soon as I can say anything, I'll give you a shout.
Excellent, and I'll try and guess who it is.
By all means, drop me an email if you can.
I will do, yeah. Right, see you soon.
Okay,
thanks for your time.
Thanks
again. Cheers, Brian.
Sarah.
Hi, this is Susanna Corbett. Thanks for downloading Steptod and Son.